So,
My gosh!
yeah, all I want to talk about this week is
Echo 6-1 Tango, Small J Bravo. Oh, got it!
turns out we're not alone. The Pentagon declassified some footage that appeared to show a UFO, series of UFOs. They're calling them unidentified aerial phenomenon. This footage had been floating around for the past few years and was brought to light with the help of none other than Tom DeLonge of Blink-182. So if you enjoyed them in high school like I did, I guess now you're vindicated. But here's the deal with this footage. The Pentagon released a statement that reads as such. After a thorough review, the department has determined that the authorized release of these unclassified videos does not reveal any sensitive capabilities or systems and does not impinge on any subsequent investigations of military airspace incursions by unidentified aerial phenomenon. So the inference here is basically something like, this didn't come from us. We don't know where it came from. So if the private sector wants to figure it out, that would be cool. So, yeah, looks like there's aliens. Probably a good time to figure our stuff out. Hello witches and welcome to Salem, the weirdest place on earth. I'm still filming from my quarantine dungeon far, far away from New England. So today I thought I would revisit an article that was posted by a guest contributor on ToSalem.com a few weeks back. By the way, if you are in the esoteric, witchy, occult, history, touristy, New Englandy space and would like to write an article for a cool website like ToSalem.com, write me a note at joel@ToSalem.com and I could probably get you in there. And there's a wink. This guest contributor posted an article that was sort of a general overview of alchemy. Now, full disclosure, I asked them to write that article because I have been obsessed with alchemy for a very long time. But it's only recently that I sort of arrived at what I think the foundational understanding in alchemy is. And I want to talk about that today. So if you're interested in Gnosticism, alchemy, obviously, Hermeticism, ancient wisdom, science, philosophy, witchcraft, I could go on. This is going to be a good one for you to strap in and sink your teeth into. Now to get started, let's just do a general overview of what alchemy was in the ancient world. And a lot of this is taken from that article posted on the site, link in the description if you want a more thorough examination. We're not going to linger here too long, but just give you a baseline understanding of what I'm talking about here so that the rest of the video makes sense. So alchemy is a term that references a school of thought which emerged in the Western world, was fairly prominent in its heyday, went on to be revitalized in the Enlightenment, was foundational in the philosophical, spiritual, magical, political, religious underpinning of the Western world. The roots of alchemy are somewhat mysterious, still kind of up for debate, but generally what you need to know is that alchemy has been thought of in the Western world as basically a process by which you can liberate a physical material from its properties. Now, like I said, this is a very general overview, but some of the things that alchemical thought has given us are things like as above, so below, right? That is a common understood trait of the cosmos that comes from alchemical thinking, which basically is a law of correspondence, right? It means that if you look up and you see that something works a certain way, you can expect that that same thing likely works the same way where you are, even though it may not apparently be doing so. Now, alchemy has a bunch of these principles, and we could honestly do a whole video just on those, but I actually want to get a little bit deeper today. So I recommend checking out that article on site again, or diving into the Emerald Tablet. That's probably a good general introductory alchemical text. Link for that also in the description below if you want to check that out. So alchemy bounces around in the ancient world for a while. We're talking places like Egypt, we're talking places like Rome, spreads throughout Europe, Asia, Africa. It shows up in various incarnations all over the world. Bounce forward a few hundred years, people like Isaac Newton become sort of fascinated with alchemical thinking and quite famously go on to do a series of alchemical experiments. In Newton's case, this almost drove him absolutely insane. I mean, he was kind of crazy in the absolute best way you can be crazy before all that, but that's a topic for another day, I suppose. Now, when most people think alchemy, they tend to think a couple things. First, Harry Potter. Let's get rid of it. We're not going to be talking about it, although we are going to be talking about the Philosopher's Stone. Second, trying to turn lead into gold. So, this is a big deal, and we're going to be diving into it. But what you need to know is that the experimental process of turning lead into gold had a deeper structure than just simply a chemistry experiment. Now, we're going to be diving into that structure shortly, but you should know that the chemistry experiment element of it was actually instrumental in the foundation of chemistry via Robert Boyle. So here's just a little list of some other offshoots of alchemy, things that have gone from the alchemical process and alchemical thinkers into the modern world, to which we owe a debt to alchemical thought and thinkers for these things. These are things like metalworking, gunpowder, inks, dyes, paints, cosmetics, leather tanning, ceramics, glass manufacturing, the preparation of extracts, liquor distillation, and a lot more. A lot of those things have their roots in the alchemical process, in alchemical experimentation. But we are going to jump a few hundred years more into the future to get to the core of what this video is actually about, which is sort of the modern conception of alchemy. And that has to do with a friend of the channel, somebody who's probably going to show up a lot from this point forward if this video does well, Mr. Carl Jung. So who was Carl Jung? Let me answer that in 10 seconds. There are tons of videos covering Carl Jung's entire biography on YouTube. I suggest you go check those out. What you need to know for the purposes of this video is that Carl Jung really had a central thing he was trying to resolve in his body of work. Building on top of the work of people like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung kind of came to realize that there was a sort of ultimate state of being for humanity. And being a good psychotherapist, he thought that that process was achievable through psychotherapy. So most of the work that was published by Jung during his life had to do with this process, the psychotherapeutic process. A lot of Jung's contemporaries didn't know what Jung was really about, especially the later he got into his career. The reason for this is that Carl Jung purposefully hid a lot of his more esoteric, occult, spiritual leanings for the majority of his life, in fear that if it was ever revealed that he was into this stuff, it would end up shadowing or tainting his earlier work. And he was so committed to not doing that, that a lot of times the things that he was actually working on weren't published until way after he was dead. Now, the most infamous example of this is the Red Book, right? This is sort of, if you've heard of Carl Jung and if you looked into his works, his collected works at all, the Red Book is going to be in the top 5 usually. But what is fascinating about this book is that it compiles a series of experiments that Jung himself underwent, let's say between like 1910 and 1930, in that ballpark. But this book was not published and made publicly available until 2009. That's how committed he was to keeping this side of his work largely private. Now, the Red Book is gargantuan. It is very difficult to get through. It is gorgeous. It features illustrations and absolutely stunning calligraphy done by Jung himself. And since its release, it's gone on to be understood as sort of the fundamental underpinning of Carl Jung's work. It's like the central piece that you need to understand in order to understand everything else. Now, just think about that for a second. The man set it up so that his central piece of work, the thing that everything else revolves around, by his own admission, mind you, didn't come out until he was long dead. Now, the Red Book is many things, and again, that's a topic that's way bigger than this video, but you need to know that what Jung was trying to do in the Red Book and other similar works was to reconcile what the fundamental myth was at the bottom of his psyche. He was trying to get down layer by layer by layer until he got to the absolute bedrock of his being, a myth that was so solid that you could go no further, essentially trying to discover the core of his own personality through the ego, through the subconscious, through spiritual states, dream states, all of this stuff. He was digging down deeper and deeper and deeper, trying to go until he could get no further. And now it seems in the Red Book that he found the answer he was looking for, and even went so far as to say that the Red Book and other works like it were so pivotal to his work that everything else in his career was an offshoot of it, of this period in his life. So this is Jung himself. This is what he says he discovered in the process of doing the Red Book and other similar works, that whole era in his life. Quote, he says, "I had very soon seen that analytical psychology coincided in a most curious way with alchemy. The experiences of the alchemists were, in a sense, my experiences, and their world was my world." Now, when he says their world was my world, he means that literally. During the process of digging into his own unconscious, his own psyche, trying to get down to that fundamental myth, Jung kept experiencing alchemical symbols like this one here in his unconscious. He kept seeing these things present themselves as archetypes on a layer deeper than his conscious reality, deeper than his ego. Somewhere in the bedrock of his being, these symbols and ideas and visualizations were floating around. From this, he derives that the alchemical process, alchemical symbolism, alchemical thought in general must be operating at a much deeper level than he previously imagined. And what had been a lifelong fascination on his part with Gnosticism spins off into alchemy. So now we're going to follow Jung a little bit here, but we're then going to spin into some contemporary thought that's happening to tie this all back up into what I think is a more fundamental way to understand alchemy, and ultimately what is still, for reasons unknown to me, kind of an esoteric understanding of what the alchemists were actually trying to do and what Jung was actually trying to do. Now, without getting into a much longer conversation about archetypes and the collective unconscious and all of that, let's just say for the moment that Jung considered that these symbols were appearing in his unconscious because they were methods of communication. The things that we see in our dreams, the things that we experience in periods of hypnosis, maybe, drug-induced states and things like that, are sort of methods by which our unconscious is trying to communicate with our conscious mind and sort of unifying those two. That unification was at the backbone of Jung's entire body of work. He was fascinated with trying to achieve a state called individuation, which is one by which the ego and the unconscious are unified in the same psyche. Now, that unification was fundamental, foundational to Jung's work. It was the thing he was trying to achieve more than anything else. And Jung, over the course of his career, developed all sorts of tools and methods and processes by which someone could try to achieve that individuation. And what he discovered in the process of doing the Red Book and other similar works, the works around the Red Book, is that that process of individuation was very similar to how he saw the alchemists engaging in the alchemical process. So again, just a brief reminder of what the alchemical process is. It is that simple mechanism by which you are going from base metals, base elements into more pure, more refined elements. Just keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to it again in a minute. So let's dive a little bit more conceptually into what individuation is to get down to the root of how it connects to alchemy. Individuation goes beyond competence. It goes beyond hierarchy. When you are individuated, you could kind of say that you are above whatever systems it was that got you to that individuated state. You have transcended the hierarchies and systems that were in place that led you to that state of individuation or helped you along the path to that state of individuation, but you are now somehow above them and no longer confined to their rules and their parameters. Now this, where we're at right now, is where I wish I could have started this video. And so maybe if I make any more videos on this topic, I'll just start here, because I think it is from this little seed where we're at right now that everything else really springs. Because this process, everything I'm about to mention from this point forward, I'm coming to believe more and more is a very adequate spiritual path for the contemporary age, and one that I would love to see emerge in people like it's emerged in me, because I think it solves a lot of problems that we're currently dealing with. So here's kind of what that process would look like. 1, you need to know enough to begin to transform. And the things that you transform are whatever is adjacent to you. So you master competence of that thing. Let's say guitar. I mastered the competence of the guitar. I become a world-class guitar player. I eventually get to a place, maybe I don't become technically proficient or skilled on a virtuoso level, but I eventually get to a place where I'm competent enough over the thing that I feel that I can experiment with the forms that I have learned. And then eventually, if I keep going and I invest enough into it, I get to like a Jimi Hendrix state or something where I am now above all hierarchies that I had learned. I'm taking some from this one and taking some from that one and mixing and matching, and it's all over the place, but you can no longer confine it to say that it's just this style of guitar or that style of guitar or this method or that method. It's become its own thing, separate from all methods, free of all hierarchies. So you do that for the guitar, and then you look and see what your next adjacent hierarchy is, your next adjacent thing to try and improve, and you work on that. But by the time you've gotten to that place with guitar, likely your life will have changed enough that the adjacent things that needed improvement when you started aren't the same things that need improvement now. So the system kind of self-regenerates. It's always churning on itself, always shifting. You're always getting more and more challenges out of it, becoming better and better and better. Now, this process of sort of competence and hierarchies and rising above them is sort of the topic du jour for the past, I don't know, decade or so in certain corners of the internet and academia. But it's important to note here that that process is only half of the alchemical or Jungian process of individuation. It totally ignores the unconscious, and the alchemical analog to that being the moon side. We'll get back to that in a second. Before we get there though, let's explore just briefly how this half of the equation, which we'll start calling the ego side, all the competence, the hierarchy, all of that, we'll just lump that in with ego. Let's explore how all that is potentially undermined by the Western framework. This might get a little bit in the weeds, so leave a comment below if you don't understand, if I'm not making any sense, if none of this is relevant to anything, and I should just start getting drunk on my channel. The problem with the whole competence framework Western thing is that so many of its components are degenerative, or at the very least, it is super easy to be seduced into degenerating the closer you get to them. This makes more sense when I lay it out in sort of a series of parallels, all right? So here are some things that have, I would say, philosophical underpinnings, religious underpinnings. They're rooted in something that is millennia old, has been explored by multiple people across multiple cultures, and generally we've all sort of agreed are good fundamental things to pursue as a human being. And then on the other side, I'm gonna throw in sort of what are Western analogs of those things. We're gonna have another word, a better word than analog in a minute, but let me lay it out first and then I'll introduce the better word. So abundance, you have transformed into having a lot of money. Unification with another person, you have transformed into pornography. And gnosis, you have transformed into self-help. Those are 3 examples. We're gonna work with them for a little while to try and illustrate some points here. Now, I do not want to say that these and other such things cannot be interacted with and that they necessarily preclude you from having a transcendent, fulfilled, wonderful life. That's not what I'm saying. You can be rich. I've got no problem with being rich. You can be rich and still pursue abundance on a deeper level. You can be a porn actor and still have a very deep and meaningful connection to sex. You can have a moment of enlightenment, an epiphany, an aha moment that changes your life at a self-help seminar. But going the other way around, that's where you run into trouble. Going from the things in column B toward the things in column A doesn't always necessarily work, nor is it designed to. Like, we all know that it's not wise to assume that just because someone has a lot of money that they understand abundance on a deep level, or just because someone is in porn that they have a very rich and fulfilled sex life, and just because someone is a self-help guru that means that their number one principal interest above all else is the gnosis of their flock. We know these things inherently aren't necessarily true just because they have the sort of signifiers of truth around them. In this way, money and porn and self-help are sort of intoxicating simulacrums for the things that they represent. They are indications toward other states, but not necessarily those states themselves. Again, that's not to say that they're necessarily inherently bad, but it is to say that if you confuse the simulacrum for the thing that it represents, you've lost the pathway toward the things that it represents because you're pursuing the simulacrum. You might end up getting to the thing it represents sort of by chance, but if it's not what you're actively going after, you're not going to get there quickly or efficiently. So believing that having a lot of money will give you a deeper understanding of abundance, and that is the thing above all that will get you there, and pursuing that 100% of the way will probably take you farther away from abundance than get you closer. But one result of understanding abundance in a deep and powerful way might be to have money, but it's also going to be to have a lot of other things. Now, this isn't just me going on a rant about how we have so fundamentally lost our way as a culture and bemoaning the West. I like the West. The West has the best things. But this all does actually relate to the alchemical process, in that if you are on the path toward the alchemical process, you're gonna have to deal with each of these simulacrums in due time. But how can that possibly be true if all the alchemical process is about is turning lead into gold? It doesn't make any sense that you would have to deal with your feelings about porn if you're just trying to turn lead into gold. Let's break it down into as few words as possible. The end result in alchemy is something called the Philosopher's Stone. This is a substance, it's like red, it's very cool looking, that is supposed to be able to turn base metals into gold. Why gold? Because gold is pure, gold is untarnished, gold stays gold, it's yellow like the sun, gold. So the Philosopher's Stone gives the alchemist total control over the material world, let's say. Now let's assume that everything that I just said about the alchemical process is actually a metaphor. And for the purposes of this video, let's assume that it's a metaphor in the same way that Carl Jung assumed it was a metaphor, in that it actually has more to do with the psyche than it does the material world. In this way, the alchemical process is actually about turning baser states of being into higher forms of being, more transcendent forms of being that last over an entire life and over generations and carries forward into the future, making things better and better and better. Such a state of being we might call individuation. We might call Christ consciousness, nirvana, etc. This was the form of alchemical thought that Jung was actually interested in, and this is the form of alchemy that he explored in his work. I said we would get back to it. Let's get back to it. We've explored ego and competence. We're going to call all of that the sun side of the equation, the ego side of the equation. What about the moon side, the unconsciousness side of the equation? Over here, it's important to know that the alchemists were indeed legitimately very, very interested in the relationship between psyche and the material world. So while it's fair to say that a lot of alchemical thinkers were thinking of this process as purely psychological, or maybe thinking about it in a terminology that's even deeper than thinking about it as psychological, in the unconscious realm, the imaginal realm, the realm of symbols and images, some of them were also just trying to turn lead into gold. Wouldn't you? And yes, from that way of seeing alchemy, tons of spiritualism and mysticism and ways of being in the world spiritually that you have likely encountered in your life sprung. Now again, we've arrived at a place in the video where I'm really kind of at a fork in the road. I could go one way and stay with Jung and the alchemists. I could go another way and start to explore Western esotericism more broadly, the occult, witchcraft, spirituality, mysticism, all of that. For today, I'm gonna stay with Jung, my boy Carl, but if you want to see an in-depth exploration of how these sorts of things develop, what you can do today is leave a comment down in the box, hit subscribe, like the video, and let me know that you want to see that, and then I'll probably do it. Encourage me, and I will feed you, you hungry rat. So returning to our boy Jung and our alchemists, let's just say that for both of them, for the purposes of general exploration in a YouTube video, they were both concerned with the reintegration of the feminine, the moon energy, and they saw this as a crucial component toward achieving a state known as Mysterium Conjunctionis. Basically, the union of the sun and the moon, the ego, the unconscious, all the rational stuff in the world, all the irrational stuff in the world, melding together, creating a super being in its wake. Now, we've seen this integration with the shadow self in various ways in the Western world, but largely we experience it through religious or spiritual ceremonial experiences. For Jung, this process involved exploring the unconscious via a lot of dream work and exploring archetypes, stuff like that. But the crucial thing to know, without going too much deeper into the moon side of things, is to know that it is also immediately within your grasp. So then in this way, the deepest level of alchemy that I've been able to find, the most sort of fundamental and foundational level, is really, really easy to start, but really, really hard to finish. You can begin literally right now. You can finish this video and go get started on your alchemical journey. All you've got to do is improve whatever is closest to you that obviously needs improvement. Now, some authors and thinkers who have best-selling books who shall not be named argue that competence is a thing that you can immediately sort of lean on as a way to improve that will necessarily improve all other elements of your life. In short, just get better at things. Now, I'm not going to argue that that's as fine a place as any to get going, but I am going to say that it's not the only way to go. You could, for instance, decide to make things as beautiful around you as you could possibly make them. You could decide to become as charitable as you can possibly be and just sort of chip away at refining what charity means and being more and more charitable. You could work toward your physical health if you like, and you can do all of these things without necessarily needing a real world analog, some sort of hierarchy that you're trying to master so that you can achieve in the rational Western material world. You can just make things beautiful for its own sake. You can make your body healthier for its own sake. You can do a bunch of stuff for its own sake, and you probably should. There's a bunch of ways to go about it, but just know that competence, it's one amongst many. The point is that beginning to experiment with your identity, isolating what you view as the more base elements of your identity and refining them and tweaking them and cutting away and moving up this ladder until they get more and more refined, more and more specific, more and more strong, will lead you toward a higher state of being for that specific part of your overall identity. That's the alchemical process. And you can lean on philosophy, you can lean on religion, you can lean on spirituality, you can read and watch YouTube videos and listen to podcasts, however you want to do it, to try and isolate sort of tried and true ways of being that have spread out across time that feel right to you. Pair those things up against your own ways of being. Start experimenting by mixing them together and get more and more refined until it's integrated into your personality, whatever the thing is. Just doing that, and that is half the equation, but just doing that alone will change your entire universe. Without getting magical or woo-woo, which I could and probably will at some point, that is the relationship between your mind and matter. You know, we take a lot of the relationship between the psyche and the physical world for granted, but it's kind of a miracle that if you wanted to build a log cabin, you could. You know, there aren't other creatures that we know about, excluding the ones that we maybe have just discovered, who have that miracle of a pathway towards intention and then manifestation. Now, if you want to throw on top of that a more esoteric, spiritual view of this, you certainly can, and I'm not going to stop you. But even if you don't, it's pretty incredible. So that's one half. But then if you start paying attention to your dreams, if you write them down, if you start reading people like Jung and others to try and stimulate a conversation between your conscious and unconscious mind, if you do that in tandem with the stuff you're doing on the ego, the conscious, the moon side of things, you become the philosopher's stone. You become capable of things you can't even imagine now. But it takes experimentation, and it takes time, and it takes dedication, and probably above all, it takes a willingness to engage with the path. You know, it's a lifelong pursuit, the alchemical path. It's maybe the highest pursuit, because as best as I can tell, an adept alchemist who has achieved this state of individuation, or is even, you know, a few degrees shy of that state of individuation, an adept alchemist who's at that level is an adept everything. So refined would the process be within a person like that no challenge can't be met through experimentation and persistence and a desire to gradually move toward whatever state it is they're trying to achieve. So that, to me, is the conversation that Jung was having with the alchemist. That to me is the deepest form of alchemy, the bedrock of a lot of things that we do here in the West, and I'm sure the East as well, but I won't speak to that. It's personally a lifelong pursuit for me, and if it's a pursuit for you, I want to know. Leave a comment below. We need to band together, us alchemists, alchemist union or something. So how does all this strike you? Should I go deeper into exploring the divine feminine, the unification with the unconscious, the moon energy, all that sort of stuff? Do you want to hear about that? Subscribe to the channel, click the thingy. Very happy to make this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Really want to make a lot more stuff like this, so let me know if you're feeling it. That's all for now. I hope you're good. I hope you're safe. I hope you're weathering the storms that we're in right now well. Stay weird, witches. I'll see you next time.